Hello, it's me here. After all the serious topics exposing negativity in the world, let's do a 180 and talk positive, starting with good fat representation in media. We touched on this in the Exposing Fatphobia blog a little, but if you understand the importance of positive rep of characters who are black, trans, disabled and gay, you probably understand this assignment already. I'm going to split this into two parts, this part talking about the examples of that good rep and a little extra, and the second part talking about bad rep examples and what not to do. So let's start. I think to avoid overcomplicating details for the beginning of this video, the best positive fat representation there should be is just fat people existing, outside the negative stereotypes we've seen constantly. Self-explanatory, right? We've seen stories about how kids, teens, and adults see themselves as characters who are, as just mentioned, and had empowered them and made them feel good about themselves. So seeing fat characters in a positive light would do a similar thing. One example of a character I've seen that fits the bill had been Gold Lewis Dickinson from Guilty Gear Strive, because as I understood his role in the story, he works for the government, he does train an army and engage in meaningful conversation with his peers. He was also the reason, if we go by the Darkade Moon stories, that convinced Bridget to allow herself to be trans, but to do so on her own terms, with a bit of help from Kai, so nice plus there. And there's plenty of other characters I could talk about that might accidentally drag the video out too long, but off the top of my head, Parcher being the man who wanted to look out for his village in Emperor's New Groove, Yolan from Sea of Stars being a comedic character who breaks the fourth wall a lot, a number of characters from Wildcraft who have varying gimmicks that can create a powerful deck. Unfortunately, there might be a few small fatphobic quips in their respective medias, but it's those cases where we gotta take the little wins because we nitpick everything, that won't be fun. That said, because of the state of the world we live in at the time of recording and likely for the future, it's important when we have stories that represent fat characters overcoming those hurdles we face in the real world and struggle with in the present. And that's not a bad thing if it's called woke for those reasons. Anyone trying to drag down fat people anyway just want to feel morally superior because they're thin and quote-unquote normal, but they're very insecure and unhinged as we spoke about in the past. So let's go through a few of those woke stories. A memorable one I grew up with was Hairspray, which centered around a fat teenage girl who wants to star in a dance show and had to deal with a lot of the fatphobic BS that was going on. I grew up with the 2007 movie as a kid, but I did watch the 1988 version of it at some stage, and I think the latter was pretty good too, probably better. Another story that I thought had a similar premise was a movie called Dumpling, based off a book by the same name. Take it with a grain of salt though, as I hadn't personally watched it, but I heard it was just okay when it came out around the time. Red Shoes and the Seven Dwarfs was a movie I remember hearing controversy about because of the slogan advertising for the film, what if Snow White wasn't beautiful anymore, because in this movie, Snow White was fat, which obviously isn't a bad thing, but you can see the problem when, paired with the slogan, this movie was meant to be family friendly. But having watched the movie, it's been a bit since I watched it, it dealt with the problem of how when Snow White wore the red shoes, she would turn thin, and how many people respected her more because of that. All things considered, I think it was also pretty good in how it addressed that in the movie, and the resolution to it by way that Snow White was loved for who she really is. Bye Sweet Carol was a game that really surprised me actually, by also touching on the themes of fatphobia and confronting it, since I only hopped on the train because the graphics reminded me of the animated Disney films I grew up with as a kid. That lands as being one of my favourite games I've played over the years personally, but without giving anything away, the story itself feels almost identical to the game Omori in a few ways through the themes that they share. Shrill was a TV series I watched years ago which is more on the mature side that dealt with what I understood fat women have to struggle with in everyday life, like being hidden away and not having a public relationship with somebody, or the unsolicited comments strangers will make towards their bodies in public and the internet. I think the only downside about the series was that, as far as I understood, by the third season, it started advertising something that went against the body or fat positivity message it was initially advocating for. Take it with a grain of salt, as I never watched that season. Season 1 had only strongly focused on confronting fatphobia anyway before it went to other themes in Season 2. You might be thinking with the media I mentioned, but May, these struggles all center around women. What about men who face fatphobia? And don't misunderstand, while obviously men and boys also face fatphobia as well, it's not at the extent women and girls face it because of beauty and desirability standards in the world set for them. This obviously going outside the world of fiction. But it doesn't mean bigger or fat men should get the spotlight, or that we should abandon boys and men in our discussions on fatphobia, but we have to understand why bigger or fat men aren't scrutinized for their size as much as bigger or fat women are. In a similar vein, it's why when fat women are represented positively in media, we need to give that extra praise if they're also black, gay, disabled, trans, and it goes into the whole conversation that all forms of bigotry are connected, which I spoke about in the past. Following all that, I want to acknowledge the possibility that certain characters who are known to canonically struggle with body insecurities or having eating disorders of some kind may gain weight if we wanted them to recover, because that's how it is in real life. Some of those who were afraid to gain weight and even just eat for those reasons who overcame them had done so in the process, and that is okay. I met a few from VR chat who had actually done so, and I know this dabbles into headcanon territory when we talk about fictional characters and the media they come from, but to have people do artwork or 3D models of those characters who had those issues being depicted as big or fat, even if it's just them being a little chubby, would be empowering in itself. I remember in my online travels, someone wanted Gunyu from Genshin Impact as an avatar for VR chat depicted as fat, and it makes sense once you understand the lore behind her. It's why during my travels on the platform, wearing a fat avatar, as I spoke about last year, had been inspiring to some and helped them partially overcome their insecurities, and I'd like to do more fat avatars, if depression wasn't an obstacle. But I believe to acknowledge that weight gain and being fat is okay and the normal part of life, we have to confront the fatphobic messages that society has given us for years, which I'll elaborate on later. Outside of that though, I believe some characters would be canonically fat if fatphobia wasn't so prominent in the world, like Bee from Bee and Puppy Cat, May from Overwatch, Rosalina from the Mario series, the list goes on. And in those cases, I'll gladly say, fuck the canon. I'm glad when I do see artwork of existing Thing characters depicted as fat. And look, it can't be helped that the trolls and more unhinged populace on the internet will accuse anyone of saying it's a fetish to draw characters big or fat, or you're promoting an unhealthy lifestyle, because it's only going to be weird if someone makes it weird, and given fatphobia in the world, it's unavoidable sadly. Some people can't wrap their heads around the fact that some people will find fat people attractive just cause, and that's why it's easier to just accuse anyone who admits crushing on fat people as fetishes by default. In the same manner, some people won't believe there are fat people out there who are healthy or do have a healthy lifestyle, and automatically assume them just existing in a fat body means the opposite. Because to that logic, should I just say anyone who likes thin people has a fetish for them? Should I shout at the next thin person saying, you're promoting fat phobia for just existing? No and no. And going back to an earlier point, it's because of the fact fat phobia has been pushed onto us indirectly or directly by multiple people in multiple forms. It's why we end up having to deal with people who admit fat people make them uncomfortable or deem their existence inappropriate, normally those who are bigoted or abusive. Because to their logic, they think the best way to deal with that discomfort is to tell fat people to kill themselves, to pressure them to conform, or harass them otherwise. Especially what I've spoken about in the past, having heard what the younger generation is like even outside the internet. The fact that I've heard across various experiences where they've acted cringe and disturbing to a point where not just fat kids and teenagers, but those who aren't even fat are starving themselves, traumatized by harassment, and none of the adults around are doing anything to help those victims of essentially hate. Again, cringe, disturbing, and no way to live. Why do you think I'm all for victims punching their bullies in the face? While it will take a long time to do so, what I said earlier still stands. We need to normalize as a society that being fat is okay, weight gain is okay, and how we choose to change our bodies should be neutral. You're not morally inferior for being fat, gaining weight, or being deemed unhealthy, and you're not morally superior for being thin, losing weight, or being healthy. No matter how our body looks, whether we're deemed desirable or not, whatever our lifestyle choices, we are acknowledged as human beings that are deserving to live in peace. And no matter how many abusers and trolls out there try to bring us down when we do have that positive rep in our media, we have to keep on doing it. Because in the grand scheme of things, the comments of those who only know how to spew hate, lies, and abuse mean little compared to making sure any other fellow fat person or other who struggles with body insecurities out there can see themselves positively in whatever media they consume, and realizing that contrary to what society tells them, they're not the problem. It's why I would really love to try and change the game for VR chat by making fat avatars normalized, and I would like if VR chat acknowledged fatphobia as part of their rules about not tolerating harassment or bigotry. Because yeah, sure, for a majority it might be startling seeing a fat avatar when you've been so used to seeing thin avatars constantly, and there's not a lot of avatars I've seen that would be good to wear in public that are actually fat. Rec Room's done a better job with body diversity given that they do have body sliders for their avatars, but the same concern with VR chat about enforcing the rules applies there too. It's also difficult with VR chat because while Rec Room everyone is fixed to one generic avatar, VR chat's more dependent on other creators uploading avatars for either personal use or for everyone to wear, and it's telling when many creators don't think about body diversity. So with that said, if you're watching this wanting to make bigger fat avatars for VR chat that everyone could use, I'll go through references to look at and what others responded to in relation to them, and maybe in the future I'll expand on this as a Blender or Unity tutorial video. As a warning, the nature of said references are from the Feedism community, and I have a whole thing at the end of the video talking about it in relation to fat positivity. There's a few other avatars that have done this to a lesser extent I can't recall, but there's two female avatars I particularly like from a creator known as Ethic, and what these two avatars have is a body slider toggle that affects the entire body, those avatars being called Tactifatty and Supersized E-Girl. Having that one slider that affects the whole body would be enough, but admittedly given the Feedism background, it does lean towards unrealistic sizes. So with that said, if you were to ask me personally in terms of realism, how big or fat you can make your own avatars with the one full body slider before it teeters in fetish or unrealistic territory, I felt for E-Girl you would stop at the 50% mark and for Tactifatty around the 60% range. I also asked a few others for their responses, showcasing the avatars and mentioning that if I did something similar it would be for everyone to use. Some agree with what I had, a few saying a little bigger, but the majority has said for E-Girl the 30 to 40% range would be the limit, and Tactifat about 40 to 50%. And while I recommend anyone wanting to make fat avatars adhere to these, I don't believe it's bad if you wanted to go by mine as well, because there are bigger fat people out there in the real world and I want to be considerate of them. But at the end of the day, it can't be helped if people do find fatter models discomforting regardless of what gets put out there, because that's pretty much reflecting what real life entails, and that's a them problem to sort out. Because I've refused to believe fat avatars can't exist peacefully in VR chat, much the same fat folk can in the real world. Representing everyone on the platform would be the dream goal, and I personally would love a redo of the two I just mentioned that anyone can use without tapping into unrealistic territory. But it's still a whole can of worms of what's deemed the acceptable fattest avatar you could wear because of how prevalent fatphobia is. And even then, we need to convince VR chat that they should take fatphobia seriously no matter how big an avatar one wears is. And if you happen to see anyone intentionally using avatars like these that can change from thin to fat with the intention to make fun of fat people or weight gain, remember to mute, block and report, because they probably are an abusive individual. If you are new to the likes of Unity and Blender and you are curious about how to try and get a head start in learning how to do bigger fat avatars, I'll give a brief summary. So when I started, I used V-Roid Studio for making the base humanoid body. Pretty sure it's still free on Steam, you can download it there. Unfortunately, you can't make your avatar bigger or fat there, so you would also have to use Blender. Then you have to understand and learn how to use the sculpt mode and the grab brush specifically to make your avatar look bigger or fat as you like. And then after all that, export it for Unity to upload as a wearable VR chat avatar. It's very vague, but it's a start. And for me at least, when I learn software like V-Roid and Blender, sometimes messing around and finding out is the best way to learn, so you can understand what each feature does, and there's a lot of YouTube channel tutorials that I've seen that can help with the process. Either you have a computer that can run both, it's definitely accessible. Obviously where you're wanting to have accessories and other tidbits to add on, you may need to fork up a little money, or maybe create them yourself. I know I got some things to flex on this channel at some stage inspired by the games that I've played, and who knows, maybe I'll do a tutorial on this channel if I survive my circumstances. But before I finish this video, I do want to pop a question that refers to the earlier kink, Feedism. You're welcome to leave at this point if you feel it may make you uncomfortable, but if you're still here, you were warned. The question you probably never asked, but I think is fair to acknowledge because of what I spoke about in my past vlogs: could the Feedism kink bring about any fat positivity? And my answer is yes, but only to a very small extent. I think the only thing, at least from what I've seen in the past in my endeavours, is seeing fat characters and people embracing their weight gain and enjoying food and being unapologetic about it. Remembering that in the world we live in that encourages us to shrink and starve, that could be a big revelation to see. There have been rare stories that people overcame eating disorders because of Feedism, and we have to remember that some of those in that community are facing the same struggles fat people otherwise are facing. Contrary to what you may be thinking, they are all still people. At least for VR chat, those who are done fat avatars who are from that community does give that bit of hope that we can absolutely have fat avatars present in that space, but in a more appropriate context. They may not be perfect, but they are possible. But that's where all the positives end. Being a kink, Feedism does have its issues. It's not so much that other kinks are featured or the unhealthy lifestyle aspect of it, but rather unrealistic body sizes can pop up, a fair bit of content is based on fatphobia that fat people face, but the biggest red flag, while it's more on a creator by creator basis, is when I've seen artists have minors featured in them. be it outright or quote-unquote aged up. At the end of the day, as I said before, fetishization isn't activism, and any fat positivity Feedism has should be something we should already be seeing outside a kink background. But remember to respect people's lifestyle choices because body autonomy swings both ways. Using Feedism to justify being fatphobic under the assumption everyone there has extreme ambitions and malicious intentions is not the flex you think it is, and I've spoken in the past about a double-edged case from VR chat where that happened. Because there will always be those who hate fat people who will always blow things out of proportion to justify being abusive. And in the world we live in, there will always be much more of a threat to people's health than anyone affiliated with the Feedism community. If anyone really cared about the health of fat people, cared about kids, all of that, they would stop fat phobia in all its forms. You want to fight fat phobia? You're fighting for all fat people, and that includes anyone affiliated with Feedism. And that's part 1 of the whole positive representation of fat people in media. Part 2 will go into talk about what not to do, so keep an eye out if interested. Okay? Okay. As always, if you got up to this bit, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to eat enough, hydrate, take any meds if you do, and until next time. Bye!